Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video we are going to dive into a story that sounds like a thriller, a dramatic handshake, whispered plots, international intrigue, all set against the backdrop of shifting power in Africa and the rising tensions in the United States. Our central narrative is this: Ibrahim Traoré, leader of Burkina Faso, shakes hands with Vladimir Putin, and 47 minutes later, rumors swirl that the CIA had planned an assassination. Whether every detail is true or exaggerated, the event reveals much about how global powers are jockeying for influence in Africa, how the US views its own security and foreign policy, and how the two spheres overlap. We will begin with the African side of the story. Who is Ibrahim Traoré? What role is Burkina Faso playing? What are the pressures and maneuvers on the continent, and what might this handshake really symbolize? Then we shift to the US angle, how America sees Africa, what actions the US is taking right now, and why the so-called assassination plot narrative matters in Washington. Then we will compare how Africa's autonomy and agency are clashing or aligning with US strategic interests, and finally, wrap with what this all might mean for the future. Let's start. Part 1. Africa, Traoré, and the stakes. First we need context. Burkina Faso is a landlocked country in West Africa, part of the Sahel Belt. Over the past years it has seen coups, insurgencies, foreign interventions, and growing instability. Ibrahim Traoré came to power in 2022 via a coup, ousting his predecessor in a context of security collapse and public frustration with government control. Traoré presents himself as a nationalist and a voice for sovereignty, resisting what he sees as external domination. In that context, reports of Traoré shaking hands with Putin stir alarm in many quarters. Symbolically, it suggests Burkina Faso is aligning or at least flirting with Russia or Russian influence. Whether that's purely symbolic or signals deeper cooperation is what observers are debating. Some analysts suggest that Russia, via mercenary groups like Wagner, has been expanding influence in Africa, offering military, security, resource agreements, and political backing in countries that feel neglected by Western powers. The handshake itself becomes a focal point. In a world of optics and messaging, a public handshake with a leader like Putin is more than courtesy. It conveys political posture, a statement of non-alignment with the West or an overture to a new patron. And that leads quickly into rumors. Shortly after that handshake, whispers emerge that the CIA planned an assassination 47 minutes later. These are dramatic allegations, and credible details are hard to verify. But the narrative is powerful. It underscores how fragile African leaders can be, how dangerous external interference can become, and how narratives of plots, spies, and betrayal are part of modern geopolitics on the continent. Traoré himself has publicly claimed he survived conspiracies, assassination attempts, and challenges from internal and external actors. He has accused at least one plot involving over 100 conspirators. Whether he is exaggerating or whether plots truly exist, the claims cannot be dismissed lightly given Africa's history of foreign interference. Across Africa, we see a larger trend. More leaders are pushing back on dependency, demanding more equitable partnerships, diversifying their alliances away from a single dominant power, and sometimes leaning toward powers like China, Russia, India, or regional coalitions. African trade is booming with multiple foreign players, even as Russia's influence is being challenged. At the same time, African nations are trying to assert their own sovereignty, rejecting the old patterns of neo-colonial control. But the continent is not monolithic. Some countries welcome Western investment, treaties, security partnerships, military assistance, while others are turning away. In some places there is resentment toward Western conditions, perceived hypocrisy, or demands for too much control. The old paradigm of West gives aid, demands loyalty, is under stress. In Burkina Faso's case, to publicly associate with Russia is risky. It invites pushback from France, the US, regional neighbors, and international institutions. It signals that Traoré is mapping a new foreign policy, possibly one less constrained by Western influence. The alleged plot by the CIA, whether true or not, plays into a narrative of resisting Western hegemony and warning other leaders about the dangers of appearing too cozy with foreign powers. Africa today is experiencing a multipolar moment. The power of external players like the US, China, Russia, the European Union, and even smaller players is being contested. African countries increasingly demand to be treated not as recipients, but as equals, with agency. Those who successfully navigate this environment may gain leverage, others may fall prey to external coercion or internal instability. In parallel, events such as the end, or expiration, of AGOA, the U.S. African Growth and Opportunity Act, are rippling through Africa, impacting trade, industry, jobs, and Africa's sense of trust in U.S. partnership. Some countries are responding by redirecting trade ties to China, India, and others. In short, Africa is not waiting passively. It is repositioning itself in a rapidly changing global order. Thus the handshake and the assassination rumor become metaphorical. The handshake is an assertion of sovereignty and alternative alignment, while the assassination rumor is a reminder of the danger of stepping too far off the predetermined path. Whether the plot was real or not, the perception matters, and the story resonates deeply on a continent where external meddling has long been a painful memory. Part 2. The United States view and its moves. Now let us shift to the United States. How does America see all this? What does Washington worry about? And how credible is the assassination narrative in its own context? First, U.S. foreign policy toward Africa has always been a mix of ideals: democracy, human rights, development, and strategic interests, security, resources, influence, countering rivals. In recent years, few topics have loomed larger than counterterrorism, particularly in the Sahel, as extremist groups proliferate. The U.S. has operated through AFRICOM, security cooperation, training, intelligence sharing, drone bases, and local partnerships. But in 2025, the U.S. also faces domestic pressures, budget constraints, cuts to foreign aid, isolationist tendencies, shifting priorities. For example, the U.S. government cut major foreign aid to Africa, including important healthcare and HIV programs. The U.S. also suspended aid to South Africa under a controversial executive order tied to racial and land reform arguments. The African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, expired, causing Trump's administration to express support for a short renewal, but uncertainty remains. These shifts erode confidence in U.S. reliability. On trade, the U.S. is still a major partner for African nations. In 2024, U.S.-Africa trade, goods and services, climbed, with substantial imports and exports. But Africa's dependence on the U.S. is waning, other players are stepping in. Losing preferential access under AGOA threatens significant job losses across African industries. In terms of security, the U.S. continues to respond to threats. For example, AFRICOM recently conducted airstrikes against ISIS in Somalia. The U.S. works to maintain strategic readiness, preserve partnerships, deter malign influence, e.g. Russian mercenaries, and protect its investments and interests. But Washington is also watching with concern when African leaders appear to cross lines with Russia or act independently. The handshake with Putin would be seen in Washington as a red flag. But is the CIA assassination plot credible? The U.S. government does not officially confirm such dramatic clandestine operations publicly. Intelligence agencies operate in the shadows, but direct assassination of a foreign leader is legally and morally fraught and politically explosive. In recent memory, the U.S. has avoided acknowledging such plots. That said, allegations of interference, regime change, coups, covert operations are part of historical record, e.g., covert interventions during the Cold War. In this case, the rumor may serve multiple functions: as deterrent, as narrative, as warning shot. It could also be misinformation designed to intimidate domestic opposition or foreign powers. For Washington, the story is dangerous either way. If Traoré is serious about aligning with Russia, the U.S. may lose influence, create strategic gaps, or provoke a security vacuum. If the assassination rumor gains traction, America's reputation could suffer, raising accusations of imperial overreach or rogue covert action. U.S. policymakers must calibrate whether to publicly deny, ignore, or quietly counter. Another wrinkle: the U.S. is dealing with domestic turmoil, polarization, unpredictable foreign policy direction under the current administration. The attention and resources it devotes to Africa may waver, leaving openings for competitors. Meanwhile, Africa's shift away from U.S. dominance may reduce leverage over strategic minerals, geographies, and alliances. And if African countries perceive the US as untrustworthy, inconsistent, or self-interested, that weakens long-run soft power. Thus, from Washington's vantage point, Traoré's handshake might be interpreted as defiance, a threat, or a challenge, one that invites reaction, deterrence, or covert countermoves. Part 3. Comparing Africa's trajectories and U.S. strategies. Now let us compare in parallel how Africa, as symbolized by Burkina Faso, is evolving and how the United States is reacting, and where the friction or synergy lies. Agency versus patrons. African leaders increasingly assert agency. They no longer want to be passive recipients of aid or diktats. They want real partnerships, respect, and the freedom to diversify alliances. The handshake with Putin is a sign of that, a signal that Burkina Faso will not be shackled to one power. On the U.S. side, this challenges the old system. The U.S. must earn loyalty, not impose it. Multipolar competition. The global balance is shifting. The US, China, Russia, EU, Gulf states all compete for influence in Africa. Africa is not merely a playground, it is a decisive ground. Those who succeed will gain access to resources, strategic positions, and political leverage. The US must adapt to a more contested space. Reliability and trust. The US has been inconsistent. Aid cuts, policy reversals, geopolitical distractions make it less reliable in the eyes of African nations. When AGOA goes away, when US aid is slashed, when foreign priorities change, trust erodes. That gives space for Russia, China, or other powers to offer more stable albeit sometimes more demanding partnerships. Risk of overreach and blowback. If the US tries heavy-handed tactics, covert plots, regime change, assassinations, those may create backlash, anti-American sentiment, destabilization, and long-term resentment. The narrative that Washington tried to assassinate a foreign leader, even if false, can fuel radicalism, unite opposition, and sharpen anti-US sentiment. Security versus sovereignty tension. The US often frames involvement as securing global interests, counterterrorism, stability. African leaders often fear that security partnerships become Trojan horses for control. That tension is central. How can security cooperation be equitable rather than exploitative? Narrative and perception. In modern media, perception matters. The handshake plus rumor narrative is powerful, regardless of the reality. Africa is watching. The US must manage its narrative carefully. One misstep, one leak, one scandal, and reputational damage may outweigh strategic gains. Thus, the handshake episode and plot rumor become microcosms of the struggle between Africa's new assertiveness and US attempts to maintain influence. They reveal how hard it is for powers to adapt to a world where former clients demand respect and renegotiated terms. Part 4. What it all might mean. Strong conclusion. So what do we take away? Let me summarize and end with the big questions. We have a scene. Ibrahim Traoré publicly shakes hands with Putin. Minutes later, rumors of a CIA assassination plan swirl. Whether every detail is true may never be fully known. But as a story, it captures a moment of tension between African sovereignty and foreign interference. In Africa, the old model of dependency is under stress. Leaders like Traoré are testing new paths, pushing against constraints, and signaling they will chart their own course. The continent is no longer passive, it is reshaping itself. In the United States, the old confidence of global dominance is being challenged. Domestic constraints, shifting priorities, strategic overextension, and the rise of competitors make its footholds more tenuous. The US must adapt or risk losing ground. Between them lies a battleground of narrative, influence, security, trade, and legitimacy. Who will define what is acceptable in foreign relations? Who will be seen as the rightful partner, not the patron? How many leaders will dare to shake hands with uncertain futures? If the US overreacts, if it leans too heavily on covert tools or intimidation, it may push more African states further away. If it underengages, it may cede influence to competitors. The challenge is to maintain a reputation for partnership, consistency, respect, shared interest, and humility. In closing, the handshake and the plot rumor are not isolated spectacles. They reflect deeper shifts in power, perception, and purpose. They are not just about Traoré or Putin or the CIA, they are about a new world order in the making, where Africa demands its place and the US must choose whether to respect or resist. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts. Do you believe the assassination plot rumor? What do you think Africa's future alignment will be? I will see you next time.